when you can't get stuff, you become very inefficient. You have all kinds of people getting tied up trying to chase down all kinds of stuff, and things on hold, and things can't move forward, and truck drivers are sitting waiting, and your containers are sitting and waiting, and ships are at anchor not being able to unload. So you've got this whole gummed up economy that makes everything really hard to deal with and very inefficient.
Welcome to the Construction Disruption Podcast, where we uncover the future of building and remodeling. Join us as we explore an industry that is always evolving with new products, practices, designs, and technologies. Each episode of Construction Disruption meets with forward thinkers from the design and construction industry, as well as others, perhaps outsiders sometime, to share their unique insights and perspectives as well. Construction Disruption is created and sponsored by Isaiah Industries, a manufacturer of specialty metal roofing systems and other building materials. I'm Todd Miller, president of the company. Our co-host is sales manager Seth Heckman. Creative director Ryan Bell is our behind-the-scenes producer today. So, Seth, great to be here today. I'm looking forward to our guest today. I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Really looking forward to it.
Very good. Well, one of the things I think about is if you're really going to be disruptive and a game changer in the construction industry, I really think you have to understand the bigger picture. I don't care if it's someone building a skyscraping office building in Chicago or a tiny house out in the middle of a desert outside of Albuquerque. For the person who's doing the construction, that project, regardless, is probably a very significant investment for them. So if someone's going to introduce some disruptive technology, some product or practice that is going to influence or even change, how someone would build that skyscraper or that tiny home, I really think that it's important to understand the economies that are going to motivate and drive all of the stakeholders from all of that, from the property owner to the designer, and even including the myriad of contractors who will probably be involved as well. And so that's exactly what we want to dive into with our special guest today. This is a gentleman who I have really enjoyed following for a couple of years to try to capture his incredible insight into economic trends and forecasts. He never ceases really to amaze me with his ability to, I don't know where he comes up with everything, but to pull out and to dig into numbers and statistics and really pull good conclusions in many times, or at least things that really make me think, and even sometimes to develop a few prognostications from them. That's a prognostication.
That's a good one.
That's a word for us. Okay. So that said, our guest today is none other than Mr. Wolf Richter. Wolf has a great website at wolfstreet.com where he digs into the stories behind business, finance, and money. As part of that, once you're at his website, you can sign up for his free e-newsletter, which I'm not even sure if it's exactly 2 or 3 times a day, but several times a day, this drops some incredible insight into my inbox, and I always look forward to reading his e-newsletter. So, Wolf, it's a real pleasure to have you today as a guest on Construction Disruption.
Thank you, Todd. That was an awesome introduction. Thank you for having me on your podcast. We've been in contact for a long time, so this is a nice moment to be here and be chatting with you all.
Well, we're looking forward to the conversation, that's for sure. So thank you. So, I have followed your website for a couple of years, and I believe so much in the great information that you provide that we actually became a sponsor of yours a while back. But one of the things I do want to say about Wolf, once you visit his website, is that he creates these amazing graphs and charts that are just always fascinating to look at and to understand the amount of inference and information that comes through those graphs and charts to help understand, whatever that subject is, what's really going on and what the history is. But Wolf, I'm curious, would you mind sharing with our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself? Love to hear about your history, your career, where your fascination with all of these numbers and graphs and economics came from. And I'd also really like to hear how one goes about getting a cool name like Wolf. So that would be neat too.
Yeah. So the first thing I think I need to explain is that I'm not an economist. So I'm not trained as an economist. I'm not one. I've cut my teeth in business. I have way back in the day. I got an MBA in finance from the University of Texas at Austin. And I then worked in the car business for a decade, and then I worked in private equity and in the East Coast. And I spent a lot of time traveling around the world. So there's a period in my middle years that were supposed to be the highest income years of my life. I decided I've had it, and so I went off and I traveled around the world for 3 years without coming home. And that was an incredible experience, during which I also met my wife and gave me a whole different outlook on economics in general, because you see it in a different point of view. And then eventually, during the financial crisis, I got so upset and angry with the things that were going on. And my wife told me to start a website because she got really sick and tired of listening to me ranting and raving. And eventually I did. And so that's the product now. It's my full-time gig. I don't do anything else. I concentrate on it 100%. It's 7 days a week. And as Todd, as he said, 2 articles a day, usually. Most days, sometimes just one, and I'm loving it. This is the best job I've ever had, and it's an incredibly fun job to have and to participate in the discussion of all these big issues that we're now facing.
Yeah, well, there certainly are those, that's for sure. And I have to say, when my wife gets tired of hearing me, she just tells me to go away. But so that's great. She encouraged you to do something productive and something that really is bringing great information to folks. Well, kind of jumping into things a little bit, one of the things that you write a lot about is commercial real estate, and COVID in particular, the pandemic has given you a lot to write about on this topic. Just kind of an overview. What are the challenges and changes you're seeing in commercial real estate, including something I've seen you write about is the redevelopment of mall and office properties into other types of projects?
Yeah, so commercial real estate was really shuffled around during the pandemic, and there were already some trends in place before that got vastly fueled by the pandemic, by the shifts in the pandemic. So we've had a red hot industrial sector. So that's warehouses, fulfillment centers, and those kinds of things. That's been red hot. It was red hot before the pandemic. It has just gotten redder and hotter. And because of the growth of e-commerce, this is now a particular issue with supply chain challenges we're having. So you find a lot of this industrial real estate in Southern California, linked to the ports of LA and Long Beach. So where the containers are coming off, the ships that have to be taken to a warehouse, and at the warehouse they unload the containers and distribute the goods to different trucks. And so if you don't have enough warehouses, you can't process the containers, and so everything starts backing up, and then trucks are waiting, and containers are waiting, and ships are waiting, and the whole thing gets gummed up. So industrial commercial real estate, so warehouses, that kind of thing, continues to be in huge demand. And we see that all around. And then there were, the brick and mortar retailers, as I call them, and that started to go downhill with e-commerce 20 years ago. And at first it wasn't really visible, but then in 2017, 2018, we had some major retailers go bankrupt. We've had a lot of smaller retailers go bankrupt. We had a large number of regional department stores go bankrupt. And so suddenly we had malls that were partially empty, that had anchor stores with nothing in it. And so the retail, before the pandemic, this has been going on before the pandemic. So commercial real estate in the retail space has been troubled for a long time, and it's gotten really hit hard during the pandemic. A number of malls went back to their lenders, and even some of the biggest mall landlords, like Simon Properties, has sent some malls back to the lenders. The commercial real estate jingle mail. So they're keeping what's functional, and they're disposing of the malls that are not that great. Now there are mall properties that can be converted into something else. You have to probably bulldoze the whole thing, and a mall has a lot of real estate, and so if it's in the right location, it has parking lots, it's a huge amount of real estate. So if you want to do something with it, you can. If the property is in an expensive location, we've got a big mall in San Francisco here, Stonestown, that is being redeveloped. It's going to have many thousands of housing units on it. There's going to be some retail, and there's a movie theater and a grocery store, that kind of thing. But the parking lot, the huge parking lot, and some of the big retail shops are going to be just bulldozed and turned into something else. This works in a very expensive environment like San Francisco. If the mall is out in the country somewhere where real estate is not very expensive, that's a different question. So a developer has to look at that. So that's the retail space. Now we've had the office space. And the office space in San Francisco, that's an example, but there are other cities, and we're going to a few of those now, has been red hot until shortly before the pandemic. And incredibly tight office market, and companies were jumping on every available office space they could get in order to grab something for future use that they could grow into. They hadn't, they didn't have any people to stick in these offices, but they wanted the space for future use. Office per square footage rates were among the highest in the nation, just right around, just a little bit below where Manhattan is. And it was just a ridiculous fight for office space that distorted a lot of things. Then came the pandemic and working from home, and now over a quarter of the office space in San Francisco is available for lease. It's on the market. So this is one of the biggest office gluts in the country now. Within a very short period of time, this happened. I mean, it just from red hot and over exaggerated and a bubble type environment to one of the worst office markets in the country. Houston is worse. Houston has been in terrible shape ever since the oil bust of 2014, 2015. And then came working from home. So Houston is over 30% in terms of office space on the market. Other cities are less hard hit, but also hard hit. They're in the teens with their vacant office space. And so now the question that faces the office sector is, what are we going to do? Is this going to change? Our companies are suddenly going to need this office space, and what are we going to do with the office space that they don't need? And this is being discussed a lot in San Francisco. San Francisco is not a big city. And so to have this dead downtown there that used to be very vibrant, you have to do something. The retailers are going out of business. The restaurants are going out of business. The bars and the hair salons and all these businesses that cater to office workers, they have trouble surviving. We have Walgreens stores closed and Target stores closed, and other retailers are closing because the normal traffic that you get in an office, in an urban office center, you don't get anymore. And San Francisco office workers will eventually go back to the office in larger numbers. I mean, that is clear. But right now we're still down by 80% roughly, from 75-80% from where it was. So even if we go back to 50%, we're still down 50%. And so, yeah, this is a question that in San Francisco will take many, many years to resolve. In other cities, it might not take as long. And then we'll have to deal with these office buildings that have to be used for something else. And we can talk about the redevelopment there. And the other part of real estate that's still doing pretty well despite the pandemic, but it's looking at some problems, is a multifamily in urban centers. Apartment rents in San Francisco, for example, are still down 25% from their peak in July. In other cities that have come up, there's a real shift in rents around the country. So we have some cities with rental spikes of 20%, and other cities like San Francisco, rents are down. And single family housing, that's a different kind of rental property. That has done extremely well. So, when you look at commercial real estate, you see all these different things, and they're not moving in the same, on parallel on the same track. They have diverged years ago, and now the divergence got even worse. And some of the things that we can't build enough warehouses, and we don't have enough housing in some areas and too much in others, and then we have all this office space that we don't know what to do with, and we've got mall retailers and other retailers that are more and more being supplanted by e-commerce. And that's what commercial real estate, that's kind of the summary of commercial real estate. And there's huge opportunities and huge problems. And they're not necessarily in the same spot.
So are we starting to see a lot of loan defaults occurring on some of these properties, or were some of these not leveraged? Or
yeah, so in the retail space, we've seen, and I didn't mention the hotel space. That's also an interesting thing, but that is recovering. Yeah. But in the retail space, we have seen numerous defaults of malls, and I mean a whole bunch. And the biggest mall landlords have done that. They own these malls in separate legal entities. So when they default, it's only that legal entity that gets, So Simon Properties can easily unload a mall by just letting the lenders take it. And they have done that. They have done that on a whole bunch of malls. Brookfield has done it. All the mall landlords are shedding their malls. So now the lender gets the mall, and the mall's still functioning in these cases. These are not zombie malls, man. These are functioning malls. And so the lender has this mall, and they're going to sell it. And eventually, and so they're going to have to take the loss, cut the price, and take the loss and sell it to somebody else, and so that may be a landlord that's trying to make a go of this mall as a retail space, or it may be a developer that's buying it, and and then when the developer buys a mall like that, they have a much lower cost basis, and they can at that point get rid of all the tenants and plow the mall down if it's in a good location, and build something new. If the mall is in not a good location for residential use, for example, it'll just sit. It'll become a zombie mall. There are lots of these zombie malls out there. You can see the videos on YouTube. I mean, there's no use for them. It's just land, and it'll take many years before somebody decides to do something with them. And a lot of these malls are backing loans that have been rolled into commercial mortgage-backed securities. So we follow those, and there have been a lot of defaults that were caught by those commercial mortgage-backed securities. The interesting thing about these securities is that they're structured in such a way that the lower layers or lower tiers take the loss, the first loss. So there's an equity tranche, and then there's a chunk rated tranches, and they take the first losses. So if you've invested in the AA rated tranche, there's a good chance you don't have to take a big loss. But we've seen AAA tranches get cut to D for default, and they're now in foreclosure, within a year. I mean, that's how fast it went. I mean, these AAA rated securities are now in default, and ratings agencies were completely, once again, caught by surprise with how fast the deterioration went. And this whole thing, it takes a while, but once the mall defaults gets foreclosed on, then there can be a new beginning from a real estate point of view. Then a developer can come in and say, look, I can buy the mall for next to nothing for the land value, and I can build mixed use or residential on there. And if that works out, then that's a good opportunity. And if not, you have dead real estate sitting there for many, many years.
And that goes back to the point you said earlier in that summary. It all comes down to the real estate value in that given market, because the zombie mall describes a mall that we have nearby here to us, where we're in a really relatively cheap market, and there's been better land, better use buildings for viable opportunities that may have come for that mall, and it just hasn't made sense. Would love to hear you're describing that e-commerce evolution and how that has affected, small, mid-sized retailers. Obviously, they've gone out of business and it's all been eaten up and consolidated in these huge behemoth corporations. I would love to hear your perspective on what that means for the economy as a whole, long term. I've been envious of some of their power and weight that they can throw around when I'm reading stories about the supply chain issues and how Walmart can charter their own entire barge to get 1,500 containers out of China, where we're waiting on one or two to get out and just waiting in line ourselves, and what that means. But what's your thought on that? Is that good, or is that greater risk, potentially greater reward long term? What does that mean?
Well, this is one of those changes in the economy that you can't stop and you can't avoid. It's like the sun rising, you can't, it's going to happen. And it doesn't really matter whether I think it's good or bad for me personally, but it's going to happen, and sure, there's a retailer that goes out of business that I used to rely on. It's now gone, and so it has that kind of local impact. But we have to keep in mind all the large retailers, so Walmart, Macy's, the big department stores, they all have huge presence in e-commerce. And so e-commerce is not something that only Amazon does. Everybody does it. And in many of these retailers, their brick and mortar business has been shrinking for years, and the e-commerce business has been doing very well. So what does that mean? It means they're having to invest in warehouses. They're having to invest in delivery systems. They're having to invest in all the brick and mortar infrastructure that e-commerce requires. So that's good for the economy. So you have that investment going on. Anytime you have a big change, there's investment going on, and that's good. There's different kinds of jobs. Retail jobs are going away, but the e-commerce jobs are growing, and are growing in very large numbers. And that anything from drivers and warehouse workers and all those people, but also robotics, programmers, high-tech jobs. Macy's had a tech center here in San Francisco with hundreds of employees. All they were doing is Macy's.com. They were doing the tech work on it, and they closed it down. They moved it back to the East Coast. But it was one of those opportunities for tech to get involved in retail, and that's what's happening. So overall, I think the move is good. For people like me who hate to go shopping, it's great. E-commerce is the best thing that ever happened to me personally. I don't have to waste my time chasing down a pair of jeans anymore. It's just so easy now. I don't. Any change like that is going to have some winners and losers. I like to see these malls get redeveloped into other productive properties. I hate to see urban blight, and that happens with retail. You have a store that closes. You have lots of stores that close, and there's so in San Francisco we have a pandemic of that. Had it before the pandemic, and we had so many closed stores that the city decided to impose a vacant store tax, so that developers would do something with these stores. That just bought them up and then sit there. So we have these neighborhood stores that are closed. We have these big commercial strips with store after store closed. So they need to convert them to restaurants and to nail salons and to other things, and not selling goods. And so this is an issue that's been plaguing New York City, Manhattan, the same thing. I mean, they have these fabulous shopping avenues, and store after store is closed. This is bad for tourism. It's bad for everything, but you can't make a go. And so, this is an issue. What do you do with these smaller retail stores? A mall you can bulldoze, but what do you do with these smaller retail stores? The restaurants, okay. You have 20 restaurants on the street and 6 nail salons and 2 barbers, and so it's tough. There is another example here in San Francisco, and you're talking about expensive property. So this is very expensive. This is a multi-billion-dollar construction project that started 5 years ago in just south of Market, just right near the Salesforce Tower, which is our tallest tower in San Francisco. And Oceanwide in China, Chinese property developer built that. They built another, started building that, and they did another one in Los Angeles, and they've got an unstarted project in Manhattan. And that project ran into trouble. It's supposed to be 2 huge towers, and I posted a photo of it on my site. I went down there and took one of them. It's gigantic. It's just an eyesore. It's been there for 5 years. It's now defaulted, so the creditors are claiming it. It will go through bankruptcy, in the United States. It will take many years to resolve this. So we have this very expensive piece of land in the middle of commercial San Francisco that's already been a construction site for 5 years. It's now at grade level. I mean, they have put in the foundation finally, and it's at grade level. That's all left out. And you see these metal structural elements come out of the ground. They're huge, and that's it. And it'll be another 10 years or 15 years maybe or longer before something happens to that property, before it's finished, before it's a nice looking building or complex of buildings. And that's the real danger too when you talk about a whole segment of real. And so this was mixed use. It was condos, hotel, and office space. So the office space has become commercially unviable. The hotel, I don't know how many hotels we need in San Francisco at this point, so maybe not. And the condos might be viable, but, we've got a lot of condos on the market in San Francisco. So, this is one of those issues that, what do you do with it? And somebody will have to come in and either finish it or change plans. And this is a very expensive property. I mean, it's just one of the most expensive locations in the United States, and still we're having trouble getting this project done.
So as I think about people out there, our listeners and viewers who may be in construction, it seems like there is this opportunity out there for them to get involved with redevelopment of these spaces, repurposing, retrofit, office build-outs and modifications and things. How long do you think that process is going to take before it evens out? I mean, is this something worthy of someone pursuing as a business, or is it going to be more short-lived than that? And I guess the other thing I think about in terms of this is, someplace all of this has to start with a visioning process of what these properties could be used for instead.
Yeah. And so when a developer comes in to redevelop a property like that, the question is. So if I'm the developer, the question for me would it be cheaper to start with bare land, or would it be cheaper to use the structure that's there and modify it? And if it's not cheaper to modify the structure, if it's just cheaper to start with bare land, it's not going to happen. The building is going to get boarded up until somebody tears it down. And that is standard procedure. I mean, that's kind of the normal thing when you have a nondescript office building that's old and that nobody wants anymore, and you can't convert it. It's going to get torn down, and then a developer buys the bare land and starts from scratch. And so that's kind of the norm. But then there are opportunities, and especially with unique buildings. So we've seen that with historic buildings. That's been done for a long time, like the Cannery here in Fisherman's Wharf, and many historic buildings on the East Coast, and they make beautiful condo buildings or hotels or whatever. So and with in Manhattan with the lofts that they've used, they've used warehouses and light industrial properties from the 1800s to make these beautiful lofts out of, and so that's been done for a long time, and these are high-end properties. I went to Tulsa, where I used to live, and I went to Tulsa, spent a couple of nights last week at a hotel downtown that used to be City Hall, and there's 10-story concrete building, nondescript concrete building. I'm sure the designer won some awards for it back then, but today this looks like a nondescript office building made out of concrete, and in stories roughly. And when you walk into the lobby, it still looks like an office building, and it's been converted to a hotel, the A Loft as it's called. So there's sort of loft like hotel rooms, and it's well done. They left some of the historic touches, like they have mail chutes by the elevators where people the office workers used to stick the mail and would drop down into the basket at the bottom of the post office, pick them up. And these are cute. Nobody even knows anymore what a mail chute is. So this was pretty successful, and it's a hotel now, and so that's a conversion. And when you look at it, there's a lot of things that need to be done differently. So there's a long, narrow building. So that's good for residential, because you have a core with the elevators and some utilities, and then you have the units on the outside, and they all have windows. If you have a round or square office building where the inner units don't have any windows, then it gets very difficult to convert. That's a case where an office building is really not good for anything other than an office building, because in residential, you want to have windows. You want to be able to get daylight. And so if it's a long, narrow building, that's perfect for that. And that's what this building was. So every room had nice amounts of windows. But there's plumbing issues, so you have to put in the plumbing. You have to divide the building differently, the floor plans differently. It's a concrete building, so it's not easy to change structural elements around. There's lots of expenses involved doing that. Every room had to have its own bathroom. Before, when there was office, they had bathrooms down the hall somewhere. So you had to put the plumbing in, you had to put the electrical in, and these kinds of things, and air conditioning for each room, and so I don't know how much money they spent, but the building was probably very cheap. Tulsa has been through a depression after the oil bust of the 1980s. And when I was living there, it lost 15% of its employment over a span of a decade. And the major oil companies that used to be headquartered there, they moved to Houston and never came back. So this was when oil bounced back, Tulsa didn't bounce back. And so properties were very cheap there. And you could pick up a lot of stuff for next to nothing. And so it probably made sense to the developer to put in a hotel. And it seems to have worked out. That's generally how it happens. There are modern office buildings in Tulsa as well, and so when there's an oversupply of office space, companies will upgrade. So they will leave their old digs and move to new digs. And so the new office buildings that you've created, the latest and greatest, they'll find tenants. That's not the problem. They have to find the right price point, but they'll find tenants. The office buildings that will lose tenants are the older ones. And if they're collateral for loan, they're going to go through foreclosure. The lender will end up with these older office buildings. Somebody buys them. They still have to get rid, if there's leftover tenants, they all have long-term leases. So they have to get rid of those tenants. They have to wait till the leases expire or pay the tenants incentives to move out. This takes years. So when you want to redevelop an office building into residential, you're talking years. There's a waiting period just to get the tenants out and to go through bankruptcy and foreclosure and those kinds of procedures. And then you have to get the permits and you have to do all these things. So we're talking years. It's not something we can do today. So a developer would have to come in, and have a long-term plan for this. We're looking at downtowns that are in trouble today. Redeveloping those properties will take years. So there's this time gap there, or it's just not going to happen. It's just going to be tough. It's not going to happen. And during that time gap, you have the supportive businesses get in trouble, and so it's a very tough situation for these cities. But if you're a developer and you have backing from lenders and you know what you're doing, I think there are some enormous opportunities there to get involved in some of these redevelopment projects.
So the process could certainly play out over time for builders and remodelers and even design professionals. Very interesting. So you touched on it earlier about work from home and the reduced office tenancy rates. What are you hearing anything out there in terms of the whole work from home concept and whether employees like it, whether business owners like it? What are you hearing out there?
Well, everybody's got a different opinion. That's what I'm hearing. Mm-hmm. One thing is for sure that even smaller companies that never really did work from home, they let their people work from home more frequently, like architectural firms and so forth. I mean, you have to have an office, you have materials at the office, and you have different things. So people have to go to the office, but 1 day or 2 days a week, they might work from home, and they can work more productively at home when they really just need to put their head down and get some stuff done. And so that's on one end. On the other hand, we have companies, especially here in San Francisco, they have abandoned office work. Essentially, they have created meeting spaces for people to get together, and nobody's got a desk anymore. Nobody's got an office anymore, and it seems to work great. Some startups have never had an office. They've been working from home from the beginning, and now that seems justified. There's on Wall Street. There's a big push to get people back to the office. And people are very reluctant. I mean, young people like to probably go into Goldman Sachs and because it makes you feel really good. But there's a lot of resistance to fighting the traffic and dealing with all the commuting issues. And so, it's just a really mixed bag. And I think what we're seeing now developing is a lot of flexibility where companies are trying to save money on office space, and that's been happening. I mean, the cost cutters have started looking at that, and they're seeing that we no longer need all this vast amount of office space for future use. They're saying, we don't really need that. We can maintain what we have without adding to it, or we can cut down a little bit and put some things on the market. And big companies like Google, they're still acquiring office space and for future use, and but they're also getting rid of some office space, so it's hard to tell. It will take years to play out, but employees like to have flexibility. That much is clear, and corporate cost cutters see the benefits of working from home if it can be done. And this is just office workers. You can't have a manufacturing plant like yours, Todd. It doesn't work.
Sure,
you have to
right.
go to work to do the job. And there's a lot of companies like that or working from home is just by definition not an option. So it's just a part of the commercial real estate that's being impacted by that. And I don't think it will go away. It's here. It's spreading. Companies have learned to make it work. Employees have learned to make it work. The disadvantages, the advantages, so it's a mixed bag to some extent. A lot of times it has been pointed out that young workers really need to be in a social environment to be, to learn the ropes, so to speak. And that may be true. If you have a kid coming out of college, starting a new job and working at home, that's probably a lot more difficult to do than going through 2 or 3 years in a corporate office and learning how to do things there, where you can ask questions without problems. And so, I think it's a reality, but it's we eventually see more people go back to the office, but work from home is not going to disappear. It's here to stay.
Cat's out of the bag, and it's gonna. I see what you're saying. I know my son graduated from college in 2020. His first job, which he's still at, they were work from home for several months, right? So he was working and had not met any of his coworkers in person for many, many months. He is in the office now, but just 2 days a week, and he's at home the other 3 days, and seems to love that lifestyle and the way it works. So a lot of our products are used in residential remodeling, which, in the wake of COVID, we saw absolutely boom in terms of the number of home improvement projects people were taking on, whether it was DIY or whether it was professionally installed. And one of the things that really I think has helped that has been interest rates, because people were able to refinance or go out and get, fairly economical short-term home improvement lending. Kind of switching gears here a little bit, but what do you see happening out there in terms of interest rates, going forward, and what do you think will have to happen based upon your observations?
Well, we have one of the most amazing periods right now. So we have had record low interest rates because of central bank policies, and which include a huge amount of asset purchases by not just the Fed, but by a bunch of other central banks around the world. And these asset purchases have pushed down long-term interest rates. And last year we had record low mortgage rates, so they've come up since then. But it was just an incredibly cheap period to finance things. So now we've got inflation, and depending on how what measurement you look at, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the headline index was up 6.2% year over year for October. The CPIW, which is for urban wage earners, that was up 6.9%. The I bonds, which the government sells, that their new interest rate came out, and it's over 7%, and so there is a significant inflationary pressures building in the pipeline and already here on the shelves. And when you look at wholesale inflation in Utah, you see that in your own purchases. So this will be further up in the pipeline. Materials and supplies and all kinds of things are getting more expensive, and by a lot more than just 6% in many cases. So transportation costs are much more expensive. So all that has to get plowed into these prices, and eventually it ends up being a consumer price item. And at the same time, we have these record low interest rates. So now the gap between whatever inflation measure you want to look at and the interest rates is at a historic widespread. And which means that so-called real interest rates adjusted for inflation are historically low. They're negative to the tune of minus, depending on what you're trying to finance, a mortgage maybe minus 4%, and minus 3%, minus 4% in real terms. And of course, that's a great opportunity to borrow. But will this go forward like this? And so we've had one of the most dovish Feds ever, and the Fed has refused to acknowledge the problem of inflation so far. But now they brushed it off with saying it's temporary, and it's not been temporary. It's just been getting worse and worse and worse. And we look at the inflation building up in the pipeline, and it's getting worse. So there's really not any indication that's going to be temporary. And so they're going to start dealing with that eventually. And dealing with inflation means that long-term interest rates have to go up. And there's several ways the Fed will do that, including first ending its asset purchases, and it announced it will do that, and then unloading its balance sheet, which in bits and pieces, which will allow long-term interest rates to float higher. And so, it's going to be more costly to borrow in the future than it is today. and that's almost guaranteed. I don't know how long this future lasts. Will that be 2 or 3 years, or whether it'll be 10 years or 20 years, long-term kind of thing. And but long-term interest rates have already come up some. But they're still held down by the Fed's asset purchases. Those asset purchases are now scheduled to be finished, at mid 2022 next year. And the Fed must speed this tapering process up. So long-term interest rates, I think, are going to rise further from here and next year. And when you think about it, if mortgage rates meet the rate of inflation, you would have 6%, 6.5% 30-year mortgage rates, and that would only make it even with inflation. Mortgage rates are normally above inflation. And so in a normal time period where you have 6% inflation, you have mortgage rates of 8 or 9%.
Sure.
And so that's what we had in the 70s. And then we got inflation that went to the double digits, and mortgage rates went to the double digits. And that changes the calculus for everything. So people can't afford to spend $2 million on a house when rates are 5 or 6%, when they could still afford it at 2 or 3%. So the markets are going to react to these higher interest rates in some way, and so it will bring down assets. So if mortgage rates rise substantially, you'll see housing prices come down. You'll see certain types of commercial properties coming down, and at the same time, when you're doing remodeling jobs and those kinds of things, you need to finance that. So you're looking at higher mortgage rates to finance it. You're looking at possibly a lower sales price of the house. So the calculus changes. The calculus has been incredibly positive over the last 2 years to do these things. The mortgage rates have been extremely low. Now we have high inflation and low mortgage rates. I mean, these are some of the best conditions you can imagine, except now we have shortages of everything. So you really think now is a great time to do the remodeling, but you can't get the stuff to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this kind of overstimulated economy actually does. You have good conditions to invest in things and buy stuff, but it creates too much demand, and now we can't supply that demand, and so you run out of stuff, and you can't finish the projects because you can't get the appliances, or you can't put the windows in the building, or you can't put the facing on the tower, and it causes these kinds of problems, and it makes you wonder, should I start with a project now? And you get it halfway done, and then something comes up missing. You need to wait 6 months to get that, and everything is on hold until you get it. And then you have labor problems. You can't hire the people you need to hire, or you hire a contractor, and they come for 3 days, and then they get another project, and they don't come back for another 3 months. And so these are the kinds of issues that we already have now. And when we get higher mortgage rates, higher interest rates, I think it will take some of the pressure off, because some of those projects get put on hold or get canceled. And that's what higher interest rates do. They will lower demand a little bit. And so maybe the system can balance out a little bit, and you can actually hire people to do the jobs, and you can actually get the materials to do them. And that would be a good thing in many ways. I mean, that's really what should be happening. We're not in a normal economy right now. We're in a really messed up economy. And it would be really good to normalize this and to take some demand off from the transportation system, from the supply chains, from everything, to let things settle down. When you can't get stuff, you become very inefficient. You have all kinds of people getting tied up trying to chase down all kinds of stuff, and things on hold, and things can't move forward, and truck drivers are sitting waiting, and containers are sitting and waiting, and ships are at anchor not being able to unload. So you've got this whole gummed up economy that makes everything really hard to deal with and very inefficient. And so I think raising interest rates and to bring that demand down some, that would allow the economy to function better. And that would be a good thing. And in terms of your own projects, funding will be harder, but more expensive. But maybe the process will be a little bit easier to do, and you'll be more likely to get your materials, and maybe a little easier to hire contractors and those kinds of things.
Yeah. What switching gears a tiny bit, what insight, I know you came out of the automotive industry and spent a number of years there. What insight do you have on that right now? I mean, we hear what a mess it is, and we have lots of contractors out there in the construction industry paying 80, 90 grand for work trucks, which just completely boggles my mind. But yet they're doing it. I mean, when do you think this all rectifies itself? And of course, part of it goes back to the chip shortage as well, and these vehicles sitting out there that by the time they have chips are going to be last year's vehicles.
Yeah, this is a gigantic mess. And so the first thing, like as you said, Todd, that needs to happen is the chips need to start flowing again, and we're seeing some improvement, but it takes a long time. So when the chip manufacturer sends the chip out the door, it goes to a component maker, and they'll make a little gadget out of it, and that little thing goes into a larger component, and so that's done in Asia somewhere, and sometimes it goes component made in Asia, then there's other sub-assemblies made in Germany, and then it finally gets shipped to the United States or to Mexico for assembly into a vehicle. And so even if chip supply catches up, it will take months before the components arrive at the assembly plant to be assembled into vehicles. And so we've already passed the point where a relaxation of the problem today would mean an improvement this year. It's too late for that, but we're going to see some improvement at the manufacturing level, so at the assembly plant level next year. I don't think it will be, from what I hear, I don't think it will be fully resolved in 2022, but it's going to get better. It's already getting a little bit better. So we'll see some improvement. Now, in terms of the truck and van situation, in terms of the construction industry and plumbers and electricians and so forth, if you need a van or a pickup truck now, this is the worst possible time to need one, because you can't get them. And if you get one, you have to pay a new one. You have to pay $20,000 over sticker or whatever to get one. And the work vehicle, so the low margin bare vans, for example, that a lot of commercial users buy, they're low margin vehicles for automakers, and they're being deprioritized. So automakers are making the high end vehicles, the high end models. That's where the $80,000 pickup truck comes from. It's not your work truck. It's a fully decked out, everything on a pickup truck, because they can't make enough trucks to fill all the orders. The volume is way down. New vehicle sales are way down. I mean, they've just plunged, because there's not enough vehicles to sell. So they're making the most expensive vehicles, most expensive models, most decked out models with the biggest packages on them. And so their revenues are actually looking pretty good. And the dealers are making record profits because they're charging over sticker for a lot of this stuff. And so you have the auto industry sales volume way down in terms of unit sales, but you have the gross profits per unit up at extraordinarily high levels. I mean, it's just an enormous amount of money that's being made on these vehicles. So the other side of that story is that you really can't get a cheap work truck, and you really can't get a bare work van. And so now that has shifted to the used vehicle market, where prices of vans have jumped by 50% year over year, because there's so much demand for these things, and it doesn't matter how many miles you have on it. Somebody's going to pay over any normal amount, just to grab that. And people have bought ambulance and torn out all this stuff inside, and there's a very strong demand for delivery vans for the e-commerce business and for the construction business and for the contractors, and same with pickup trucks, just commercial type vehicles. And they're not being met. So, if at all possible, it's probably a good idea not to try to buy something under these conditions. That said, who knows what's going to happen next year? And if the chip shortage gets resolved very quickly, we're going to have more supply, but there's going to be lots of pent up demand for these commercial vehicles next year too. Because I wouldn't be the only one that's delaying the purchase. There'll be lots of other people out there doing that. And so you have that demand for these commercial vehicles be dragged into next year. And I don't know how sticky these price increases are. It's incomprehensible to me, having been in the car business for so long, that consumers would pay $10,000 over sticker, that they would, instead of negotiating and haggling. Car buying was all about negotiating discounts and haggling and incentives and rebates. And now it's whoever pays the most over sticker gets it. And commercial buyers used to be very sophisticated in the pricing models. So they go to different dealers, or they deal directly with the large fleet, that they deal directly with the automakers. And, they try to work the cheapest deal. And now it's just, I need something, give me something,
Yeah, right.
And it's, this is one of those real problems in the economy where there's, we have fundamental issues in this economy right now because of this imbalance situation, and I don't know how long that will take to work out. But if you can't get these vehicles, it's hard to do your job. These are commercial vehicles, so this is a drag.
We have an interesting situation going on right now in that there's a particular chemical used in the batteries for electric vehicles that is also used in the coatings that are used on high-performance metal building materials. And so we're almost being squeezed out of our access to that chemical because the EV folks are willing to pay so much more for it. This seems like really, everything coming together is really creating an opportune time, though, for more and more money being plunged into electric vehicle development, and folks being willing to pay the extra money because everything has gotten expensive. Do you have any viewpoints on the EV market, or? Yeah.
So the thing people need to know about EVs that makes them completely different from internal combustion engine vehicles is that the electric motor can be used as a brake, and when it's being used as a brake, it charges the battery. Mm-hmm. And it's symmetrical, so electric motor becomes a generator. And so in stop and go traffic, the electric motor does most of the braking. And if you have like the Ford pickup truck, the EV truck that's coming out, it's supposed to have 600 horsepower equivalent in electric motors. And that's equivalent of 600 braking horsepower. So this provides a lot of braking, and it can charge up the battery in that process. So what this means is that in stop and go traffic, EVs are incredibly efficient. They don't idle, so you don't waste any gasoline. You don't start them up. You don't have the waste of gasoline that when you start up a vehicle. Every time you slow down the vehicle, the batteries get charged up a little bit. And so an EV for urban delivery is like the biggest no-brainer in the history of mankind. There is no more efficient way to deliver than with an EV with regenerative braking, as that's called. And so the costs have come way down. EVs are actually cheaper to build. They're less complex to build than internal combustion engine vehicles. The batteries is a challenge, but an urban delivery vehicle doesn't need to go 300 miles. It goes 70 miles. And then it goes back to the depot, and you can charge it up. And so it doesn't need to use the public charging infrastructure. And this is a huge movement, and Ford has dominated the commercial van segment. It has dropped the ball on EV vans. It's coming up with a EV version of its of its regular van, and that's just kind of an afterthought. Whereas the other manufacturers are coming out with their own EVs built from a blank sheet of paper, and these are incredibly practical vehicles. So whether or not they cost more to begin with, I'm not sure. We'll have to look at it. But the batteries don't have to be huge. So the biggest cost of an EV, the battery, is not going to be a big problem. You only have to go 70, 80, or 100 miles, or maybe 150 miles, but you don't need to go 300. And they're otherwise cheaper to build. The electric motors are very small, so you're very free to build on top of that chassis. And we're seeing those coming on the market. So again, this is all held back by the semiconductor shortage. And so they're not really building enough of them or building any of them really right now. But in terms of operating costs, I think this will dramatically change the equation for urban delivery vehicles and for contractors running around in urban areas. EVs have the advantage of big batteries, so you can plug in your electrical equipment without any problem. There's all kinds of advantages for having those around in urban environments. On the other extreme are the trucks that haul trailers across the country. I think that will probably be the last application of electric motors because the power requirements are such that you would need a huge battery to do that, to go 600 miles straight through, pulling a trailer like that at 70 miles an hour. I don't think that's realistic right now, but there is a big part of it that's very realistic in it, and changes for the better the cost equation for people that have to use these vehicles on a commercial basis.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and hadn't really thought about that as far as those more local use vehicles and how that's going to impact that. This has been very interesting. So overall, as you look at our economy and the situation that we're in, any ideas at all as far as when we might hit a point where we feel like, gee whiz, things have kind of reached a level of normalcy again? Or do you think, are we set off on a cycle now that is going to just be constant change and disruption?
Well, some disruption is good.
Sure.
There's a lot of good things that came out of the pandemic, and including learning how to manage work from home. They've really figured out how to do that. And there's lots of other things, that will have a positive impact that we'll learn how to do. But we're facing an environment we haven't seen in really 30 or 40 years, and that's a high inflationary environment. And we're facing a globally overstimulated economy through money printing and interest rate repression and other measures. And so it really needs to be backed off pretty dramatically. At the same time, that will lower demand, and that's the purpose of it. You want to lower demand to where you can handle it, where you can have a normal economy dealing with that demand. And there will be nonlinear events. This is not going to be predictable. Like month after month, economists have underestimated the growth of inflation this year. And that's one of those things that they just couldn't grasp. That they looked at Japan and said, they did all this money printing and they repressed interest rates this year and they didn't get any inflation. And we did the same thing after the financial crisis, and we didn't get a lot of inflation. And so we're not going to get a lot of inflation. And then everything's changed. Now we've got a lot of inflation. It's going all the way up the pipeline. It's everywhere. Wages are going up. You have trouble hiring people, and there's this labor shortage. You can't get vehicles, all this stuff. And it was totally unexpected, and yet it's happening month after month after month, and it's relentless. And we're going to see these kinds of things that they're totally unexpected, and they're going to happen, month after month after month, and they're relentless. And I think we're in a very uncertain, much more uncertain than normal time, because some of the the assumptions we've had have been thrown out the window. They no longer work.
Right.
So they're gone. And now we're back to square one, and we have to figure out where we go. And so I think inflation will be with us. I think high interest rates will be with us. That will change a lot. I think those are the two big economic factors we're going to look at going forward: higher inflation, high interest rates, and there's a lot of talk about stagflation. I don't see that. You need to have stagnation and inflation. I see the inflation. I don't see the stagnation part. So maybe we'll get that someday, but I don't see that. I see lots of demand, lots of inflation, higher interest rates, and and I see lots of inefficiencies and lots of confusion and lots of risks and lots of befuddled economists and business people trying to figure out how to find your way through that. And I talked to a car dealer friend of mine just the other day, and that's the world we live in. We got to make a living dealing with the situation we have, and that's for me, and it's for you, Todd, and it's for everybody else. The same thing. We got to figure out how to get through this period somehow and make our businesses thrive. And there'll be lots of opportunities, but I think to keep in mind is high inflation, higher interest rates, and possibly lower demand, but not necessarily on the stagnation level, but just not red hot demand, just normal demand maybe.
Well, and like you said, out of the midst of that too, there's going to be opportunities, and it's going to be a lot of the smart folks and the disruptors who are going to figure out some really positive things out of all of that. So interesting stuff. So pretty much at the end of our time, I thank you very much. It's been great. Real pleasure to talk and have this time together. As you can see, I lost my co-host. He got a phone call and had to leave unexpectedly. So not sure exactly what's up with that, but certainly wish him the best. Anyway, is there anything that we haven't covered today that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered the big issues in the economy. It's a very profitable time to be in business. I mean, that's for sure for many businesses, and that's good to see. And at the same time, we've got hair raising problems, and
right. Yeah, I see.
And it's tough.
I know what you're saying. So before we close out, I want to ask you if you'd like to participate in something we do at the end of most episodes called Rapid Fire Questions. These are 7 questions. They range from serious, maybe silly, just looking for your quick response. And our audience needs to understand if Wolf agrees to do this, he has no idea what I'm about to ask him. So, Wolf Richter, are you up to the challenge of rapid fire?
I am.
Well, away we go then. Okay. Easy ones. Morning person or evening person?
Morning person, definitely. Most definitely. Always been.
Very good. Me too. The living person who you admire the most?
Well, one of them just died.
Oh. Well, it can be that person then.
Yeah. I'm going to honor him with that. Do I need to name him?
Not if you're not comfortable, whatever you like to do, that's fine. Well, that's
a guy whose family I used to live with when I was a kid, and I stayed in contact with for a long time and
awesome.
Worked for a decade.
Awesome. It's amazing the influence that folks like that can have on our lives. And my condolences for your loss there as well. Where is your happy place? Where do you like to go to decompress?
My geographic happy place, is that what you're asking?
That'd be fine, sure.
I'm at it. I'm in it.
Are you?
San Francisco.
Oh, awesome.
And particularly when I'm swimming in the bay, in the San Francisco Bay, then amongst the sea lions and the seals and the cormorants and the pelicans, then I'm cut off from the world and I'm happy.
Wow. That's an amazing picture. If there was a movie made about your life, who would you like to have play you?
Well, William Dafoe, of course.
I could see the resemblance there. Good deal. Any hobbies as a child?
As a child, well, I like to play with my electric train set.
Did you really? Awesome. Good stuff. Okay. And then I will have a confession after this. Lowest grade you ever received in a class?
Well, as low as you can go. I've had Fs. Not many. Had some.
Well, I have to say my confession is my lowest grade that I had on a report card, probably not a test or something, was in gym class. So that gives you some idea of my physical prowess. I'm not going to be swimming in the bay with the sea lions and all that stuff. What is your dream vacation?
Okay, so you're asking a guy who spent 3 years traveling around the world.
You've been all over, yeah. And I didn't know that when I put that question together.
Yeah, that changed my attitude about vacations because, I really love not taking vacations now, and because I've had this huge vacation. But my dream vacation, so what would that be? It would have to be some gorgeous mountain range hiking for 5 days or something like that.
So mountain person. Cool. Very good. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to visit and to learn from you. And we'll definitely want to do this again sometime. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, your website is wolfstreet.com. Tell us, why might someone want to connect with you other than to learn from you and visit your website? And if they wanted to connect, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so wolfstreet.com has a contact page and with an email, so they can reach me that way. And otherwise, wolfstreet.com is pretty much all I do anymore these days.
And I have to say, you are incredibly responsive. I know when I first reached out to you, I thought, this guy's too busy. He's not going to connect with me. And I heard from you very quickly. So thank you for that. Well, this has been great. Again, thanks so much. We enjoyed the time. I know our listeners and viewers will enjoy it as well. So thank you to our listeners and viewers for tuning in to this episode of Construction Disruption with our special guest, Wolf Richter of wolfstreet.com. I invite you to watch out for future episodes of our podcast. We've got lots of great guests on tap in future episodes. Don't forget to leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts or YouTube. Until then, as we always encourage everybody, change the world for somebody. Make them smile, bring them encouragement, bring them hope. Just incredibly powerful things that we can do to change the world one interaction at a time. God bless. Take care. This is Isaiah Industries signing off until the next episode of Construction Disruption.